morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana grassland as Samuel worked the fence line near his homestead. At 62, his hands still moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent 4 decades working cattle and mending what the harsh winters broke. The creases around his eyes spoke of countless sunrises just like this one, and the quiet satisfaction that came from honest work done well. He straightened his back and adjusted his worn hat against the climbing sun, when movement caught his eye along the ridge. A figure stumbled through the tall grass, moving with the unsteady gait of someone pushed beyond their limits. Samuel set down his tools and shaded his eyes with a weathered hand. It was a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair that caught the light as she made her way down the slope. Her white dress was torn and stained with what looked like dried blood and dirt. She moved like someone carrying a pain deeper than any physical wound could create. Samuel had seen enough trouble in his years to recognize it when it walked onto his land. Without hesitation, he started toward her, his boots crunching through the dry grass. As he drew closer, he could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her face, and the way she held herself as if trying to protect something precious and fragile. "Miss," he called out gently, not wanting to startle her, "you look like you could use some help." The woman looked up, and Samuel saw eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. There was fear there, but also a desperate kind of hope, as if she had been walking for days hoping to find exactly what she saw in his weathered face. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had run out of choices. "They said there might be work at the ranches." Samuel nodded slowly, taking in the torn fabric of her dress and the way she favored her left side. "There might be at that," he said. "But first let's get you cleaned up and fed. Name's Samuel McKinnon, and this here is my spread. I'm Sarah." She replied, and something in the way she said it told him it might not be her real name, but that was fine by him. Everyone deserved a fresh start, and he had learned long ago not to pry into business that wasn't his to know. He gestured toward the house, a sturdy log structure that had weathered 30 years of Montana seasons. "My late wife Martha always kept clean clothes for folks passing through. Figure some of them might still fit you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears at the kindness in his voice. "I don't have money to pay you." "Did I ask for any?" Samuel replied, with the hint of a smile. "Come on then. That wound needs tending and you need rest." As they walked toward the house, Sarah stumbled and Samuel caught her arm gently. That's when he felt it. The slight swell of her belly beneath the torn fabric. She was with child, and from the look of things not very far along, but far enough that the stress and hardship of whatever she was running from had taken its toll. Sarah saw the recognition in his eyes and braced herself for the judgment that usually followed such discoveries about unmarried women in her condition. But Samuel's expression remained kind and steady. "Well then," he said quietly, "I'd say that makes getting you fed and rested even more important, wouldn't you?" The tears came then rolling down her dust-stained cheeks as the kindness she hadn't expected to find broke through the walls she had built around her heart. Samuel didn't try to stop her crying or ask questions. He simply handed her his clean handkerchief and waited. Inside the house, Sarah marveled at the comfortable, worn furniture and the way sunlight streamed through windows that were clearly tended with care. Photographs lined the mantel, showing Samuel with a woman who had kind eyes and a gentle smile. "That's my Martha," Samuel said, following her gaze. "Been gone 3 years now, but I still feel her presence in this place. She always said this house was meant for helping folks find their way." He showed Sarah to a room that had clearly belonged to Martha, with a wash basin and clean towels laid out. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll put some soup on and see about finding you something proper to wear." Alone, Sarah finally allowed herself to examine the extent of her injuries. The gash on her leg where she had fallen during her escape was deeper than she had thought, and the bruises on her ribs spoke to the violence she had fled. But it was the tenderness in her belly that worried her most. The cramping that had started 2 days ago and hadn't fully stopped. When she emerged, Samuel had laid out a simple blue dress and undergarments that smelled of lavender and careful storage. On the kitchen table steamed a bowl of beef stew that made her stomach clench with hunger she hadn't allowed herself to feel. "Doc Henderson makes his rounds on Wednesdays," Samuel said as she ate. That's tomorrow. I'd like him to take a look at you if that's all right. Sarah tensed. I can't afford a doctor. Good thing I can then. Samuel replied, pouring coffee into 2 thick ceramic mugs. Doc's been taking care of folks in these parts for 20 years. He understands about payment plans and trading work for services. As the days passed, Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. Samuel was patient with her limitations, never pushing her to do more than she felt able, but always finding small ways she could contribute. She helped with cooking and mending and gradually took over the vegetable garden that Martha had loved. Doc Henderson confirmed what they both suspected. Sarah was indeed expecting, and the stress of her journey had put both her and the baby at risk. He prescribed rest, good food, and the kind of peace that only came from knowing you were safe. That baby's going to need stability, he told Samuel privately, and from what I can see, you're giving her exactly what she needs. Samuel had lived long enough to recognize the signs of a woman running from violence. The way Sarah startled at unexpected sounds the careful way she watched the road and the haunted look that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was looking. He never pressed for details but made sure she knew she was welcome for as long as she needed to stay. One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold, Sarah finally began to share her story. She spoke of a marriage that had turned cruel, of a husband whose fists spoke louder than his words, and of the night she finally found the courage to run when she realized she was carrying a child she couldn't bear to see grow up in fear. I kept thinking someone would help, she said quietly. But everywhere I went, people saw an unmarried woman with child and made assumptions. Some offered help that came with prices I wasn't willing to pay. Others just turned away. Samuel listened. Without judgment, his weathered hands folded in his lap as the night sounds of the ranch created a gentle symphony around them. Fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do, he said finally. But so does kindness. Sometimes it just takes longer to find. As summer turned to autumn, Sarah's condition became more apparent, but so did her growing strength. The haunted look began to fade, replaced by something Samuel remembered from Martha's face during her pregnancies, a quiet joy and fierce protectiveness that spoke of a woman preparing to bring life into the world. The other ranchers in the area had noticed Samuel's houseguest, and while some raised eyebrows, most respected him enough to keep their opinions to themselves. Samuel had earned that respect through decades of being the kind of neighbor who showed up when cattle needed gathering, or when illness struck a family. Folks are going to talk, Sarah said one morning as they worked side by side in the garden. Let them, Samuel replied, pulling weeds with steady patience. Talk is cheap and the opinions of small minds are worth even less. What matters is what's right. And giving you and that baby a safe place to start over is the rightest thing I can think of. When the first snows began to dust the peaks, Sarah went into labor 3 weeks early. Samuel rode hard to fetch Doc Henderson, while Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring ranch stayed with Sarah. The birth was difficult but not dangerous, and when Samuel first held the tiny girl with her mother's dark hair and determined spirit, he felt something in his heart that had been empty since Martha's passing begin to heal. She's perfect, he said softly, handing the baby back to Sarah, who looked exhausted but radiant in the lamplight. Thank you, Sarah whispered, and in those 2 words was everything she couldn't find language for. Gratitude for his protection, for his acceptance, for giving her daughter a chance at a life free from the shadows Sarah had been running from. Samuel named the baby Hope, partly because it seemed fitting, and partly because that's what she had brought back into his life. As winter settled over the ranch, the small family found their rhythm, with Samuel teaching Sarah about cattle and horses, while she managed the household and cared for their daughter. Spring brought unexpected visitors when 2 men rode up to the house asking questions about a woman matching Sarah's description. Samuel met them on the porch with his rifle held casually but visibly, and something in his manner made it clear they were not welcome. Haven't seen anyone like that, he said evenly, and I'd appreciate it if you moved along. This is private property. The men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options against the steady resolve they saw in Samuel's eyes. After a long moment, they mounted up and rode away without another word. Sarah had watched from the window, holding Hope close, and when the men disappeared over the ridge, she finally allowed herself to believe she had truly found sanctuary. They won't be back, Samuel said simply. And even if they are, the